A question comes to us from Ezra by way of Boston, Massachusetts. He said, I need you to speak on Shedeur Sanders sliding in the draft. Tell what's going on from the side of Saturday, because the folks all about Sundays are wonky about it. Now, Ezra is calling out the good name of people who cover the NFL. It was a mess, though, wasn't it? So Shedeur Sanders was mock drafted in many first rounds, and pretty much everyone, Jesse, I would think, had him at least top 2 rounds. I thought he was going first round. I don't pay much attention to the draft from that angle, so I don't really care. But he did not go first round, nor second, nor third, nor fourth. So I watched this the other night, and here's what's crazy about it. I never reach out to NFL front offices for feedback because I don't do an NFL show. As the draft was going on, I was getting feedback from NFL front offices, and I don't even ask for it. But once the draft started going the way it went, it was like, if I took this Zevia here and I hadn't opened it, but I just shook it up, there would be a ton of pressure built up, but it doesn't release until you pop the top on it. Once the draft got into like round 2 and 3 especially, everyone popped the top and the information just started flowing left and right. And the feedback just started flowing left and right. So, for instance, like I was in touch with a team that didn't have Shedeur on their board. So he was just a no-take at any point for them, and I was getting the feedback as to why. It was the stuff that you heard. It was the stuff Todd McShay had talked about with the Giants, only I wasn't talking to anyone with the Giants. I don't think I know anyone with the Giants. But anyway, that was feedback that was widely shared around the league. He was a disaster in the interview process. He rubbed us the wrong way. He was ill-prepared, almost to the point where you felt like he was mailing in the process because he had a disproportionately inflated sense of what his stock was in the draft versus what it was. So I heard that like a bunch of other people did. So you can take that for what it is. That's not my feedback because I didn't evaluate him. But a lot of people in front offices thought that way. So you remember a long time ago, I guess last year, I did a segment on the show, and we were talking about something called the Deion tax. And I wasn't talking about it from the standpoint of a player. I was talking about it from the standpoint of college football fans. We had to create a term called the Deion tax on the show. And the Deion tax was the price that all of us were paying for the increased amount of attention and exposure that Deion brought to college football. Because on one hand, you love that the game is getting promoted and more people are watching it, and people who otherwise wouldn't have been watching college football are coming to the table on Saturday. That's always a good thing. You always love that. However, the tax was a lot of people without much of a clue about college football were coming in the door because of Deion, which is a good thing, but the bad thing was they didn't quietly come in the door. A lot of them came in the door and couldn't wait to shout their opinions from every corner and every rooftop, and it was just ignorance in a lot of cases. And so people like us, hardcore college football fans, we looked around and we said, we love that you're here. Maybe just shut up for 5 minutes and sort of get a lay of the land before you just start running your mouth. That was the Deion tax. Fans did it. Media did it. A lot of media did it. Okay, so fast forward to this past weekend. Shedeur starts falling in the draft. And a lot of people were tagging me on social, and they were saying, could it be that Shedeur is paying the Deion tax? And I got where you were going with that, although that's not what I meant when I said the Deion tax. But what you were saying was, is Deion Sanders a weight around Shedeur's draft stock? Hey, quick timeout. Check and see if you're subscribed to the channel. If you're not, make sure you do. It's free. It doesn't obligate you or sign you up for anything. It just helps us keep the channel free. All right, back to the show. And I think you can make that argument. Like, I don't have specific knowledge of that, but I do get where you would be going with that. I think you could also, look, guys, you could also ask this. You could also ask, because this is something that, I'll give you some feedback I got from a front office type. It wasn't, we're terrified to draft him because of the Deion factor. It's actually the other way around. I had some feedback that sounded a lot more like this. We're sort of low-key concerned about what he'd be like being detached from Deion for the first time, because he wasn't the most mature kid in the world that we interviewed. When we brought him in and we met with him as an organization, we were left thinking, yeah, he seemed a little ill-prepared, but we've seen that before. But they looked at it and said, man, actually, we wish that Deion could come with him. We think he'd be better prepared if Deion could just be with him 24/7. So if you want to call that the Deion tax, call it the Deion tax. I just looked at it and I thought many things. I thought, number one, clearly the mock draft industry / media bubble that is fun to follow and it surrounds the draft had a vastly overinflated sense of where he was going to go. Again, not the first time that's ever happened, but to this extreme degree it was. But then again, this was also a one-of-one situation because not everyone's dad is Deion Sanders. Not every player coming out does have a full production company surrounding him. And not everyone has the expectation already baked in to their DNA because of what their last name is, like Shedeur Sanders has. So I think he's a heck of a football player. But I made that feeling known during the season. We had a question last week where someone asked, could he be the most overrated player in the draft? I guess you feel pretty good right now, given the results here. But my response was, well, if you're just talking about the player, I looked at him produced despite having virtually no supporting cast around him. I said, two things you knew about Shedeur was he was going to draw eyeballs and his uniform was going to be green every week because he didn't have any offensive line to speak of. So that's the way I looked at the player. Clearly, I'm not running a front office at the NFL level, and they do have to care about more than that, and they did. And I think a lot of them made that abundantly clear. But one thing's for sure, I don't know if Shedeur paid the Deion tax or if teams just didn't think he was that good. But I do know we paid the Deion tax yet again this past weekend. We've paid the Deion tax for a while in the fact that that guy is such a big deal. He's brought people into the sport that otherwise wouldn't have anything to do with the sport. And they've run their mouth even though they know nothing about what they're talking about. That's part of the Deion tax. And then this past weekend, many people who wouldn't talk about the draft much, because of the nature of how the draft went for Shedeur Sanders, took it upon themselves to assume everyone cared about their opinion on the draft, and they spoke about the draft. And some of the most mind-numbing ignorance you could ever hope to see poured out all weekend. And it was full Care Bear suicide. If you know that GIF, I use it often on Twitter. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a little Care Bear, and it hurls itself in front of an oncoming truck. That's how I felt. Collusion. That's a word that was thrown around a lot this past weekend. There was no more collusion in the NFL level against Shedeur Sanders than there is collusion in a major town when a road's flooded and no one wants to drive down it. They didn't drive down it because they perceived the risk as not being worth trying to go down the road, and there were other routes available. It's as simple as that. Shedeur Sanders, I can think whatever I think about him. I'm not drafting him. But there are 32 franchises that had a shot. Realistically, half of them didn't have a need, and so the market is much smaller than 32 teams. And then some of them had concerns that removed him from their board entirely. And so you concentrate the market down even more. So what are we talking about? 10 teams maybe. And then it gets deeper and deeper in the draft. And you want a starter in the first round, maybe the second round. But after that, historically, you're drafting backups at that position in the NFL. And you want those dudes to be church mice when they come in. And Shedeur Sanders will never be that. And so a lot of them looked at it and said, it doesn't make sense to draft this kid as a backup either. So we are removing ourselves from the equation. So you probably had a market out of 32 teams of like 5 that were even willing to touch him by that point, if that. And that's what happened. Collusion didn't happen. And anyone throwing that around, just collusion. Here's 2 things about collusion. Number 1, it exists. Number 2, it's not a catch-all explanation anytime something doesn't go the way you think it should go, or something goes in a way other than a way that would make you feel good. It's not always collusion. The world's not always out to get you. Sometimes you may have had an overinflated sense of self. Sometimes the market may have had an overinflated sense of who you are. Here's the important point, though. Did he get drafted? Albeit to the worst possible place to land as a quarterback. But did he get drafted? He did get drafted. So now, here's my opinion on Shedeur Sanders. If he's given a shot to succeed, he'll succeed because I think he could be an NFL quarterback. That is an evaluation of him as a player. I think that if there was any edge that needed to get knocked off of him or any sense of reality that needed to get injected into him, I'm fairly certain if it's ever going to happen, This little ordeal over the past weekend of his life did it. And if it didn't, nothing will. So if they're right about that, from the neck up perspective of him as a player, then who knows, maybe he'll wash out. But if they're wrong about that, or if it's a variable that could change, this will change it. And then you're just left with the skill set. And man, I think he's got the skill set to succeed at that level. I think players with a lesser skill set than Shedeur Sanders have succeeded for years in that league. They're doing it right now. So my personal feel is he will. I just don't know if he had landed in a more stable organization. I'd feel good talking that way. He landed in Cleveland. And not even Browns fans get offended when I say that. He landed in Cleveland, so I got no clue. But I do know it was a one-of-one situation. I was glued to it. As Mel Kiper's my witness, I couldn't turn it off. I could not turn the draft off this week. And I'm normally someone, because I'm a college football guy, outside of watching the first round, I'm in the gym getting periodic updates on my phone. I rearranged my Saturday to revolve around draft coverage. That's how glued I was to the draft. So I'm not saying conspiracy theory, but if this thing is all just run by a production company and everyone's in on it as an actor and the games are really just simulated like WWE matches, they got me. They got me. Hook, line, and sinker. They got me.